It gives me a great privilege today to have Randy Hill here with us today. Randy is the a youth director for the Oregon Conference, and he has a team that works with him. He is in charge of the youth with Pathfinders. How many of you are in Pathfinders? Okay, this is the boss. This is the big general on the top. Okay, he's the Pathfinder of Pathfinders, right? So Randy is joining us today, and he's going to share his message with us. And Randy, you've not only been a good, a colleague of mine, but you're a good friend. And I appreciate, Randy, you coming and sharing with us today.
Pleasure. It's an honor to be with you again. This time I'm here. This is my second time having the opportunity to share in this church. The last time was September of 20, and I think there were 5 of us in the room, and you were all online, so I never got to see your faces. So it's an honor to be with you, and I get to do the old man thing so I can see my notes. I'm happy to be here. This church has members that I have grown to love and really respect. Ken and Sandy Baird go to church here, and I appreciate their ministry. They help Pathfinders a great deal, not just for your local club, but they come and cook for different conference events too, so I really appreciate them. And the Scribner clan, our members here, and Rachel, if you're familiar with her, is my assistant at the conference office, and so she helps me. She's ahead of me, actually. She'll think of things I need to be doing and get them done before I get there, and who could ask for better than that? So she's just amazing, and I appreciate her very much. So whenever the Riverside Church is mentioned in a conversation around the halls of the conference office, my radar is on, because there's people here I care about, and one of them is your pastor. And I have found him to not only be a wise person, but a loving person. And I don't think you can get a better pastor than that. So just hang on to him. Stick your claws into him and don't let him go. Fair enough? I have a prayer that I would like to pray over our meeting this morning, and it is found in Ezekiel chapter 46. Verse 9, and I'll read it to you. I mean, you're welcome to look it up. But it is a concept that I heard that now when I go to church, when I'm attending and I'm sitting where you are, or whether I'm up here and I'm sharing, it is something that is in the back of my mind. And it says this: whoever enters by the north gate of the temple to worship is to go out the south gate. And whoever enters by the south gate is to go out by the north gate. No one is to return through the gate in which they entered. In other words, we need to leave worship different than we came in. I think that's the challenge. And I would challenge you this morning, and I would pray that prayer over you this morning, that something about your time spent here today would be something that would walk out of here with you, and you would retain it. So, our scripture that we read this morning is kind of one that I want you to keep in the back of your mind as we go through our time together. It's found in Colossians. I'd like to read it to you again if I could. And it reads like this: bear with each other and forgive one another. If any of you has a grievance against someone, forgive as the Lord forgave you. And over all of these virtues, put on love, which binds them all together in perfect unity. I want to invite you to do something dangerous this morning. I want to invite you right here in church to close your eyes. I want you to imagine all of the scenes that I'm going to describe for you this morning. And it's okay, I won't tell if you fall asleep, but if you snore, that's on you. So if you have a family member sitting next to you, I would just advise you to get your pencil sharpener out and sharpen your elbows to keep each other awake, but I want to invite you to close your eyes for as long as you want going forward. Now, we've already gone over 2 texts, and they're not even the main text I want to share with you this morning. So I just want you to listen to this text. It is the place we will spend the majority of our time. It's found in Romans, the 16th chapter. And it reads in part like this. I would like you to welcome our sister Phoebe. Greet Priscilla and Aquila. They work together with me in serving Christ Jesus. Greet also the church that meets in the house of Priscilla and Aquila. Greet my dear friend Epaenetus. Greet Mary. She worked very hard for you. Greet Andronicus and Junius, my fellow Jews. Greet Ampliatus, my dear friend in the Lord. Greet Urbanus. He works together with me in serving Christ. And greet my dear friend Stachys. Greet Apelles. Greet those who live in the house of Aristobulus. Greet Herodian, my fellow Jew. Greet the believers who live in the house of Narcissus. Greet Tryphena and Tryphosa. Greet my dear friend Persis. Greet Rufus. He's a chosen believer in the Lord, and greet his mother. Greet Asyncritus and Phlegon and Hermes. Greet Petrobus and Hermas, and greet other brothers and sisters with them. Greet Philologus, Julia, Nereus, and his sister. Greet Olympus and all of the Lord's people who are with them. Greet one another with a holy kiss. All of the churches of Christ send their greetings. Now, that was the majority of the 16th chapter of Romans. Are you just invigorated? Are you just excited by that? There are some passages in Scripture that we just kind of blow by while we're reading, right? Sometimes we can even feel a little guilty for skipping and flipping the page during the uninteresting parts. This one can be that way. It's not very interesting. It's a list of strange names. We have no idea what there's no face that comes to mind when you hear those names. Here it seems to me that Paul is calling the roll, which is a strange thing all by itself. Now, I've never worshiped in a church in which somebody got up and called roll. Can you imagine if instead of announcements, we did a roll call? I'm thinking you wouldn't want to skip church. Everybody in the room would know you weren't there. And then there's the rebellious ones among us that would go, oh, I'm skipping just to start a scandal, so they wonder where I am. I pastored a church that used to have a lady who took on a ministry. I thought it was amazing. She knew where everybody sat every week. And she would walk up and down the center aisle of the church, and she would have a little note card, and she would note everybody that was missing, and then she would send them a bulletin and a little I missed you note. I don't think it was a negative thing. Nobody took it that way. But in this day and age, I could hear people joking, a husband to a wife in the morning, hey, we better get up, better get going. We don't want to get one of those notes this week. I never heard anybody describe it that way. Sometimes calling the roll is not all that boring. Were you ever part of a large class in school? I took some in college that required attendance. A huge amphitheater full of people, and the teacher wouldn't start class without calling everybody's name and taking attendance, and kids would yell, "Here!" for their friend who was playing hooky that day. But it never seemed to work when they did that, because 2 or 3 friends would inevitably yell "here" at the same time for the offending friend, and then the teacher would look up with that look on their face like, and mark the person absent. And then after that, some guy would answer for a girl. The teacher would say, "Martha, is Martha here?" And this guy would go, "Here." And everybody in the room would bust up laughing. I read an article not long ago. It was written way back in the 70s, where a guy was talking about a situation where roll was taken. Back in the day, apparently, when you were summoned for jury duty, you were summoned by name. Now we're summoned by number, right? But back then it was summoned by name. And in fact, I'd like to read to you his article because it just fits. So he goes like this. "Last December," he says, "I was summoned to Superior Court to serve on jury duty. On Monday morning at 9 o'clock, 240 of us formed a pool out of which the jurors would be chosen for civil and criminal cases. The deputy clerk of the court stood and called all 240 names, and she did not have them in alphabetical order, so you really had to listen. There were 2 Bill Johnsons, and there was some confusion about which was which. There was a man named Clark who answered when the clerk yelled out, 'Mrs. Clark,' and he said, 'Here.' The clerk looked up and said, 'Mrs. Clark, here.' 'Mrs. Clark.' Then he stood up and said, 'Well, I thought that the letter was for me, and I opened it.' And the clerk said, 'Well, we summoned Mrs. Clark.' 'Well,' he said, 'I'm here. Can I do it? She doesn't have any interest in this kind of thing.' And the clerk said, 'Mr. Clark, how do you know? She doesn't even know she's been summoned.' There was a man whose name I wrote down phonetically because I couldn't spell it. His name was Zerfel Liechtenstein. I remember it because they went over it 5 or 6 times, mispronouncing it each time, and he insisted that it be pronounced correctly. And finally, he stood in a huff and said, 'I see no reason why I should serve on a jury in a court that can't pronounce my name.' The woman sitting next to me said, 'Liechtenstein? I wonder if he's a Jew.' I said, 'Well, I don't know. Could be. Does it matter?' 'I'm German. My name is Zeller,' she said. 'Well, it doesn't matter. That was 30 years ago or more. He and I could be seated next to each other in the jury.' 'Well, you were probably just a child when all of that happened years ago.' 'I was 10 years old and I visited grandmother who lived about 4 miles from Buchenwald. I smelled the odor,' she said." That was this man's story. All that from calling the roll. Now, a person could get interested in Paul's roll call, if only to say, I wonder how Paul knew all of these people, since he had never been to that church. What did he do? Did he buy a mailing list? And after all, he wants to raise money for all of those trips. Nah, you got to be quite the cynic to think along those lines. I could get interested in the roll call of Paul's because it gives us a picture of the membership of a church. Now, I don't expect you to remember this, but in this list there's a husband and a wife, Aquila and Priscilla. There's a man named Rufus and his mother. There's a brother, Nerus, and his sister. There's brothers Andronicus and Junius. There's sisters, Tryphena and Tryphosa. There's an old man, Penitus. That's an interesting profile of a church, isn't it? There's a single woman, Mary, and a single man, Herodian. Wouldn't that be horrible? What are you doing tonight? Oh, it's singles night at the church. But there's just the 2 of us, and she's not really my type. You think anybody will notice if I don't show up? That would be awful. There's not a real traditional family listed at all, except as God has called them together to form a new family. It's an interesting list. Sort of. Nah, not really. But for Paul, it's not a list. Let's not call it a list. Paul is packing his things in the home of Gaius, who hosts the church in Corinth. And that's when he's writing this letter. So Gaius is hosting Paul. Paul's getting ready to go west to Italy and Spain. And he's about to move to a new parish, a new church far away. Now, we guess that he was about 60 years old, and he feels like he's got one more ministry in him. Now, most churches don't want somebody who's 60 years old, because they know in just a year or two, that guy's going to be thinking about retirement, right? And he's going to have one foot in the church and at work, and one foot on a cruise ship. So they don't want a 60-year-old pastor. They want somebody with both feet in the fire. But these churches had no choice because Paul started his own church, right? He got them. They didn't get him, right? And he thinks he's got one more in him. He's going to go start some more churches. And I think he's doing this because he got a late start in this career of his. He was probably around 35 or a little bit over when he started his career. Now, he doesn't have much to pack. He's got his coat, a few books, maybe a few other things, a bedroll, and some food. And while he's throwing away things to trim down his load for the trip, getting his packing done and getting ready to move, he comes across some notes and some letters. And he sits down amongst the boxes and begins to remember the people that he's found in the notes. Let's not call it a list. You've done this yourself. Gail, my wife, and I have lived in Michigan and Maryland and California and Oregon. When Gail and I are boxing up our stuff for a move, we will run across something from our previous home that's been sitting in a box in storage since we got to the current house. The previous life, it seems, when we see whatever that was. I ran across a book not long ago that I got when I was a student chaplain at the hospital when I was in college. It made me think back to working at the hospital, the other people that worked in that office. There was Joe. He was the head chaplain. He had a way of pausing in his speech that would make you just scream inside, wanting to help him finish a sentence. But a bigger heart I've never run across. He officiated our wedding. There was another chaplain by the name of Foster Medford. It's not a city, it's his last name. He had arthritis that bothered him. Every day, his wife took a can of WD-40 and sprayed his back and his hands. Somehow, if nowhere else than in his head, it helped. And so she would do that. He and Joe would chop firewood on their days off and then give it away as a ministry. They'd come back to the office on Monday morning and he'd be carrying a can of WD-40. We human beings are a funny lot, aren't we? There was Esther, the department secretary. I could go to her with any problem, and she had a wisdom that was just amazing. She would just have a wise answer. And she helped me when I was going to conduct my first funeral as a student. It was for a Vietnamese Buddhist family. And I was panicked. How do I do that? How do I conduct a funeral for somebody who How do I do that? And she sat me down and she said, they asked you. Share Christ with them. And it was like a little switch got flipped in my head, of course. And I went and I talked about the love of God to this family. And I think they were very responsive. There was Artie, our lady chaplain. She was a lady of few words. I don't remember her saying hardly anything. All of those memories from lifting up a book that I had in storage, all of that from one object. Every time we move, we come across stuff and we stop and we remember. Don't call it a list. What Paul wrote in Romans chapter 16, he would tell you, isn't a list, wasn't a list. He was remembering people who were special to him, who now were in Rome. Aquila and Priscilla, they risked their necks for me. Andronicus and Junius, we were in jail together. Man, they're great Christians. There's Mary. Mary worked hard. She was there when everybody else quit. She was the one who always said, now, Paul, you go on home. I'll put things up. I'll put the hymnals away. I'll straighten the chairs. I'll pick up the papers. I'll do all of that. You go on home. You're tired. I could hear Paul saying, well, Mary, you're tired too. Yes, Paul, but you got to ride a donkey across Asia tomorrow. You go on. I'll pick up here. Mary, we are told, worked hard. Epenetus was the first person converted under my preaching, he says. I think he's also saying, I didn't sleep a wink that night. I spent the whole night saying, thank God, finally somebody has heard the gospel and it's anchored in their heart. The first one to respond to the gospel. What a marvelous day that was. Tryphena and Tryphosa, they're twins, right? You can hear it in their names, can't you? Tryphena and Tryphosa. They always sat there on that side right there, and they both wore blue every week. I could never tell them apart. One of them had a mole on their cheek, but I don't remember which one it was. I could never get it straight, I could hear Paul saying. And Rufus. Tell Rufus hello. Tell his mother hello, because she's my mother too. Wow. Some lady earned the title of mother from the Apostle Paul. What kind of woman that must have been. In my imagination, she was just this firecracker of a lady who always wore like an apron with lots of pockets with things in it, and she had this curly hair that she tried to pull back, but it didn't always cooperate, so it's hanging in her face. I could see it. This lady could fix a breakfast for an army of farmers. And Paul says, I'm sorry, I can't stay. I've got to go. I've got to be on my way. And I could hear her say, sit down and eat your breakfast. I don't care if you are an apostle. You've got to eat before you leave. Tell mother hello. This isn't a list. I remember when they built the famous list down on the mall. Block after block of polished stone, forming a long wall of names. Names of the fallen in Vietnam. Some of us looked at it, me from my childhood point of view, like it was a list of names. Others went over closer. They walked slowly down the column. There was a woman who went up and put her finger on a name. She held a child up and put the child's hand on a name. There was a young man who took a piece of paper and a pencil and took a rubbing of a name. there was a woman there who kissed the wall at a name. There were flowers laying there, medals laying there beneath the wall. Don't call it a list. It's not a list. In fact, these names in Romans chapter 16 are extremely special to Paul. Because even though he says, tell so-and-so hello, say hello to them, what he's really saying is goodbye. Oh, he's going to Rome, he says, but before he goes to Rome, he has to go to Jerusalem, and he's going with an offering he's collected, and he's going into a nest of hostility. So at the end of chapter 15, he says to these people, pray with me. Join me in my struggle through prayer. Pray with me that I won't be killed in Judea. Pray that the saints will accept the money in Jerusalem and that I'll get to come back and be with you. Please pray. These are not just names. Hopefully you were given a piece of paper. Grab it just now, would you, if you've got a pencil from your bulletin. On the top of that piece of paper you were given, I would like you to write this. I thank my God for all my remembrances of you. I thank my God for all of my remembrances of you. I thank my God for all of my remembrances of you. And then write a name. You choose the name. You remember the name. Write another and another and another. And while you're doing that, I would paint a picture in your imagination. A young pastor received his first assignment. He was assigned to a little church in the backwoods in the Appalachian Mountains. Now, it was the custom of that church at Easter to have a baptismal service, and it was held in a lake at sundown on Easter evening. Out on a sandbar, a young pastor stood with the candidates for baptism. After they were immersed, the candidates moved out of the water and changed clothes in a little booth that was constructed out of hanging blankets. And then they went to the fire at the center. Last of all, the preacher changed his clothes and went to the fire where the little congregation was gathered, singing and cooking supper. Once they were all around the fire, one of the men of the church introduced the new people. He gave their names, where they lived, and where they worked. Then the rest of the group formed a circle around them. And while they stayed warm at the fire, they were just there, enjoying each other's company. The next part of the ritual was that each person around the circle gave his or her name and said this: my name is, and if you ever need somebody to do the washing or ironing, you can call on me. My name is, and if you ever need anybody to chop wood, you can call on me. My name is, and if you ever need anybody to repair your house, call on me. My name is, and if you ever need anybody to sit with the sick, you can call on me. My name is, and if you ever need a car to go to town, call on me. My name is, and if you ever need a tutor for your kids, you can call on me. And around the circle they went. Then they ate, and somebody brought out a fiddle, because it was the Appalachian Mountains, and they sang happy songs. Finally, at the appointed time, the elder, with thumbs in his bibbed overalls, would stand up and say, "It's time to go." Everybody would leave, and after everybody left, the elder would take his big old shoe and kick sand over the dying fire. After the young preacher's first experience of that, the elder saw him standing there still. He looked at him and he said, "Mark my words, folks don't ever get any closer than this. In that little community, they have a name for that. In that community, their name for it is church. They call that church. Have you written a name? Do you have a name or two written down? I wonder, are any of those names fellow church members of yours? Have you written any names? I want to encourage you to keep this list. Keep the list. Because to you, it's not a list. In fact, the next time you move, hold on to that list. And even if you have to leave your car or your toys or your furniture or your computer and everything else, take that list with you. In fact, when your ministry on this earth is ended and you rest from your work on earth, tell them to stick that list in there with you. Because there's going to come a day when you shake off the dust of your resting place. And before you leap into the air, I want to challenge you to reach back and grab that piece of paper. I know, when you finally get and wait through that long line of people at the gate, some angel's going to say to you something like, now look, you went into the world with nothing, you come out of it with nothing. What do you have there? What are you holding on to? And I imagine you'll say something like, well, it's just some names. Well, let me see it. It's just some names of people I struggled with and I worshiped with and sometimes I even fought with. It's just people who helped me in my life. Well, let me see it. It's just a group of people that if it weren't for them, I don't know what would have happened in my life. I want to see it. Finally, you give it to him, and he smiles. Oh, I know all those people. In fact, I overheard them talking as they came through the gate. They were going to paint a great big sign, and they were going to hang it over the street, and it was going to say, "Welcome Home Church." Colossians chapter 3 reminds us what church is. Bear with each other and forgive one another. If any of you has a grievance with one another, forgive as God forgave you. Over all of the virtues put love, which binds them all together in perfect unity. Will you bow your heads with me for prayer? The 16th chapter of Romans, Lord, ends with these words. Now to him who is able to establish you in accordance with my gospel, the message that I proclaim about Jesus Christ, to the only wise God be glory forever through Jesus Christ. Amen.